The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored paper, with raised lettering that felt expensive between my calloused fingers. I'd read it 7 times, still unable to believe the words hadn't somehow rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking. The Blackwood Classic Automotive Exhibition cordially invites Mr. Liam Hayes to serve as lead restoration specialist for our annual showcase. My apartment above Garrett's auto shop felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in as I tried to process what this meant. The Blackwood wasn't just any car show. It was the event of the year for serious collectors, where vehicles worth more than small countries changed hands over champagne and whispered agreements. And they wanted me, a 24-year-old mechanic from a forgettable corner of the city, whose greatest claim to fame was bringing a '50 Thunderbird back from the dead last summer. They must be desperate, I muttered, running a thumb along the embossed edge of the invitation. My boss, Frank, had nominated me, that much I knew, but I never expected them to actually select me. The old man had been singing my praises ever since I'd rebuilt that Aston Martin's engine with nothing but determination and 3 reference books. "You've got the touch, kid," he'd said. "Some people learn cars. You speak their language." Maybe he was right. Cars made sense to me in a way people rarely did. Metal and machinery followed rules. They were honest. When something was broken, I could fix it with the right tools and enough time. Unlike the mess of human connection I'd fumbled through most of my life. 2 weeks later, I stood before the glass and steel facade of the Blackwood Exhibition Center, my only decent suit feeling suddenly inadequate as Maseratis and Bentleys glided past, depositing men and women who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. My hands, scrubbed raw the night before, still bore the telltale stains of engine grease embedded deep in the creases of my knuckles. Some marks never wash away completely. "Mr. Hayes?" A woman with a tablet approached, her smile professional. "I'm Vanessa, the event coordinator. We're so pleased you could join us." She led me through a labyrinth of preparation, security clearance, orientation, introductions to the other specialists. I nodded and shook hands automatically, my attention constantly drawn to the vehicles being positioned throughout the exhibition hall. Rare Ferraris, pre-war Bugattis, concept cars I'd only ever seen in books, all arranged like precious jewels under carefully calibrated lighting. "The VIP reception begins at 8, Vanessa explained, handing me a badge. "You're expected to attend, of course. Mr. Blackwood specifically requested your presence." "Mr. Blackwood?" I echoed, my voice embarrassingly tight. "Julian Blackwood." She raised an eyebrow, as though surprised I wouldn't know. "The collector who owns half these vehicles. And the building." I swallowed. "Right. Don't worry," she added, misinterpreting my anxiety. "Just talk about the cars. That's all they really care about anyway." If only it were that simple. The reception was held in a private showroom on the top floor, a space that felt more like an art gallery than a place for automobiles. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, but even they couldn't compete with what was inside. 12 vehicles, each more stunning than the last, arranged in a gentle arc across the polished concrete floor. I nursed a glass of champagne I was afraid to drink, hovering near a 1938 Alfa Romeo, while clusters of people of an evening wear conversed around me. I recognized faces from automotive magazines and business journals, the kind of people who treated million-dollar purchases as casual decisions. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" The voice came from behind me, deep and resonant, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. I turned to find myself looking up at a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair threaded with distinguished silver at the temples. His eyes were the color of whiskey held up to light. "The 8C, I replied, glancing back at the Alfa Romeo. "She's breathtaking." "Most people just see a shiny old car," he said, moving to stand beside me. "But you're looking at her differently." His cologne carried notes of cedar and something else, something that made me think of leather-bound books and rooms no one was allowed to enter without an invitation. "I'm trying to figure out how they achieved this finish," I admitted. "The restoration is flawless, but there's something about the way they've treated the paint. It has depth you don't normally see in modern restorations." A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "They layered the paint with linseed oil between coats and left it to cure for 3 weeks between each application. an old technique, rarely used now because of the time involved. I couldn't hide my surprise. You know restoration methods? I know many things, Mr. Hayes. Liam Hayes. I extended my hand automatically, then hesitated, suddenly conscious of my working man's grip against what were clearly manicured hands. He took my hand without hesitation, his palm warm and dry against mine. Julian Blackwood. The name hit me like a physical force. I withdrew my hand perhaps too quickly, the warmth of his touch lingering. Mr. Blackwood, I apologize, I should have recognized— Please, he interrupted, that ghost of a smile returning, no apologies necessary, and call me Julian. Thank you for selecting me for the exhibition, I said, struggling to regain my composure. Your work on the Jensen Interceptor last year caught my attention, he replied, his gaze never leaving my face. Few people understand how to preserve a vehicle's soul while restoring its body. I blinked. You saw that? It was just a small project for a local collector. I make it my business to notice exceptional talent, Mr. Hayes. Something flashed in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or interest. Particularly when it comes to beautiful things that deserve careful handling. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of a slender woman in a shimmering gown who claimed Julian's attention with practiced ease. He excused himself with a slight inclination of his head, but not before saying, "Find me later. I'd like to continue our conversation." I watched him move through the crowd, people parting around him like water around a stone. Everyone seemed to know him, to want his attention. Yet he carried himself with a reserve that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the adoration. I drained my champagne in one inelegant gulp. An hour later, I found myself drifting toward a 1965 Corvette Stingray, its cherry red finish catching the soft gallery lighting like liquid fire. It was positioned away from the main crowd, in a quieter corner of the showroom. A man of taste, I see. I startled, turning to find Julian Blackwood standing closer than I expected, 2 fresh glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to me. Thank you, I said, accepting the glass. And yes, the Corvette has always been a favorite. Not just any Corvette, he corrected gently. The 65 with the L76 327 cubic inch V8. Rare, uncompromising. The way he said uncompromising made something tighten in my chest. They only made a handful with this engine and the 4-speed manual, I added, grateful to retreat into technical details. Most people don't realize how special it is. Most people don't look beneath the surface, Julian replied, moving to stand on the opposite side of the car, the Corvette between us like a barrier of steel and fiberglass. They see the color, the chrome, the obvious beauty, but miss the engineering, the decisions, the soul. Our eyes met across the gleaming hood, and for a moment, I forgot where we were. The room seemed to contract, the ambient conversation fading to a distant murmur. You restore cars because you see what they could be, he continued, his voice dropping lower. The potential beneath the rust and neglect. And you collect them because— I found myself asking. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability so brief I might have imagined it. Because some things deserve to be preserved even when the world moves on to newer, shinier objects. We stood in silence, the Corvette's curves reflecting distorted versions of ourselves. I noticed his hands resting on the hood, strong hands, but with an artist's fingers. A collector's hands that knew the value of what they touched. Would you like to see them? He asked suddenly. See what? My cars, the ones not on display. His eyes held mine, searching. The ones that matter most. I knew I should decline. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was dangerous territory, not because Julian Blackwood represented any physical threat, but because of how my body responded to his proximity, the inexplicable pull I felt toward him. I'd like that, I heard myself say. The underground garage was accessed by a private elevator that required Julian's fingerprint. As we descended, I was acutely aware of how close we stood, the confined space filled with his presence. Neither of us spoke. The doors opened to reveal darkness, then lights flickered on sequentially, illuminating what could only be described as a cathedral to automotive excellence. "My God," I whispered. Before us stretched an underground space larger than a football field, divided into sections by subtle changes in lighting. Unlike the showroom upstairs with its gallery-like presentation, this was a working collection, each vehicle positioned so it could be easily accessed, started, driven. "My private collection," Julian said quietly, watching my reaction. "Few people have seen this." I stepped out of the elevator, drawn forward by the impossible beauty arrayed before me. Row upon row of the world's most coveted automobiles, from early 20th century masterpieces to modern hypercars, each one pristine, each one clearly cherished. "How many?" I couldn't finish the question. 73 at present," he replied, falling into step beside me. "Though that number changes, I'm not interested in quantity." I moved slowly down the first row, afraid to touch anything, drinking in details that most enthusiasts would never see in person. A Jaguar D-Type in British racing green, an original Shelby Cobra, its blue paint so deep it seemed infinite. A Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing with its doors raised like wings. "You drive them," I noted, seeing subtle signs of use, tires with the perfect amount of wear, engines that showed evidence of regular maintenance. "Everyone," Julian confirmed. "A car that isn't driven is just an ornament." He guided me through the collection, providing stories behind certain acquisitions. A Ferrari rescued from a neglectful owner in Monaco, a Porsche that had belonged to a racing driver who'd once saved Julian's father's life. Each tale revealed something of the man beside me, pieces of a puzzle I couldn't help wanting to solve. We paused before a partially disassembled Aston Martin DB5, tools arranged neatly on a workbench beside it. "You work on them yourself?" I observed, surprised. Julian nodded. "Some things I prefer to do with my own hands." The way he said it sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "This is incredible," I said, gesturing to encompass the garage. "Most collectors I've met treat their cars like investments. They're afraid to drive them, afraid to change anything that might affect their value." "I'm not most collectors," Julian replied, his eyes finding mine in the low light. "And I don't care about what things are worth to others. Only what they're worth to me." We continued our tour, eventually arriving at an area that appeared to be a workshop, state-of-the-art equipment alongside vintage tools, all immaculately organized. "This is where the real work happens," Julian explained, "where cars come back to life." I ran my fingers along a workbench, recognizing tools arranged exactly as I would have placed them. "It's perfect." "No," he said softly, "but it's honest." I turned to find him watching me with an intensity that made my heart stutter. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might step closer, that the electric tension between us might snap. Instead, he gestured toward an elevator at the far end of the garage. "There's one more place I'd like to show you." The rooftop was not what I expected. Unlike the polished elegance of the showroom or the cathedral-like solemnity of the underground garage, this was a functional space, a private test track that looped around the building's perimeter, with a central area that housed several vehicles under protective covers. The night air was cool against my face as we stepped out, the city spread below us like a carpet of light. Up here, the sound of traffic was a distant murmur, replaced by the whisper of wind. Julian moved to one of the covered vehicles and pulled the protection away in a single, practiced motion. Beneath was a 1961 Jaguar E-Type, silver gray in the moonlight, its lines so perfect it seemed to be moving even at rest. "The most beautiful car ever made," I said automatically. "Enzo Ferrari's words," Julian noted with approval. "You know your history. Some things are worth remembering." He ran his hand along the Jaguar's fender, a gesture so intimate it felt like I was intruding on a private moment. "Would you like to hear her engine?" Before I could answer, he was opening the driver's door, sliding into the leather seat with practiced ease. He reached for the keys stored in a hidden compartment beneath the dash. "Join me," he said, an invitation that felt weighted with meaning beyond a simple ride. I hesitated only a moment before walking around to the passenger side. The E-Type was built for speed, not comfort, the interior snug, forcing our shoulders close together as I settled in. I could feel the heat of him beside me, smell the cedar notes of his cologne mixed now with the rich leather of the Jaguar's interior. Julian turned the key, and the engine awoke with a growl that resonated through my entire body. He revved it once, twice, a smile spreading across his face, more genuine than any expression I'd seen from him all evening. "Beautiful, isn't she?" he said, raising his voice slightly over the engine's purr. "Perfect," I agreed, though I wasn't sure if I meant the car or the man beside me, illuminated by dashboard lights, looking suddenly younger and more alive. He turned to me, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other on the gear shift. "Would you like to drive her?" No question had ever sounded more tempting or more dangerous. "I couldn't," I protested weakly. "She's too valuable." "She's a car," Julian said simply. "Built to be driven. And you have the hands of someone who understands that." He removed the key and held it out to me, the metal catching the moonlight. When I reached for it, our fingers brushed, a contact so brief, yet so electric that I almost dropped the key. His hand was warm against my perpetually cool fingers, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Our eyes met over the connected hands, and I saw something flash in his gaze. Recognition, perhaps, or realization. Whatever it was, it made him hold the contact a heartbeat longer than necessary before finally releasing the key into my palm. I slid into the driver's seat he vacated, adjusting myself to the car's dimensions. The leather was still warm from his body as I positioned my hands at 10 and 2, aware of his gaze on my profile. "Go ahead," he urged softly. "Let her breathe." I brought the Jaguar to life once more, feeling the vibration through the steering wheel, up my arms, into my chest. I eased her forward onto the track, giving her more throttle as we rounded the first curve. The car responded like an extension of my body, eager and willing. Julian watched me, saying nothing, but I could feel his approval in the way he relaxed into the seat beside me. After a complete lap, I reluctantly brought the E-Type back to its starting position and cut the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy between us. "You drive like you were born to it," he said at last. "Muscle memory," I deflected, though the compliment warmed me more than it should have. "My father taught me on classics. Said if you can handle a car with no assists, you can handle anything." Your father was right. Julian's voice was quiet now. "Tell me about him." The request caught me off guard. "Not much to tell. He restored classics out of our garage, taught me everything he knew before he died. Heart attack, 8 years ago." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." Julian seemed to consider something, his fingers drumming lightly on his thigh. "My father collected art, paintings, sculptures. I was a disappointment when I fell in love with cars instead." "And now?" I asked, a sad smile crossed his face. "Now he's gone, and I have a building full of the machines he never understood." The confession so simply stated opened something between us, a crack in the perfect facade he presented to the world. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to offer some comfort, but I restrained myself, unsure of the boundaries. "It's getting late," I said instead, holding out the key. "I should probably go." Julian took the key, his fingers deliberately brushing against mine again. "Of course. The exhibition opens tomorrow. You'll need your rest." We exited the Jaguar and walked in silence toward the elevator. The night had grown cooler, or perhaps I was just more aware of it now, hyper-conscious of the man beside me and the invisible line I'd been careful not to cross. As we waited for the elevator, Julian turned to me. "Liam." The sound of my name on his lips sent a jolt through me. "Yes? Thank you for indulging me tonight. It's been refreshing to share this with someone who understands." "The cars, you mean?" I asked, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. His eyes held mine. "Among other things." The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and we stepped inside. As the doors closed, I felt the same awareness of his proximity I had earlier, but now charged with something new, a current of possibility that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. We descended in silence, the tension between us building with each floor we passed. My mind raced, cataloging every look, every accidental touch, searching for meaning in what might be nothing more than the friendly attention of a wealthy patron. This is madness, I told myself. He's Julian Blackwood. You are nobody. And even if... I couldn't complete the thought. Even if he felt this strange connection too, what then? I had spent my life with grease under my fingernails, bringing beauty back to broken things. He moved through a world I could barely comprehend, let alone belong in. The elevator reached the main floor, where the exhibition hall stood dark and quiet, the cars shrouded in protective shadows. Julian led me through a side passage that would take us to the staff exit. My driver can take you home, he offered. No, thank you. I have my truck. I hesitated, and I like driving at night. Helps me think. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. We had reached a quieter corner of the showroom, moonlight streaming through the high windows, catching on chrome and polished paint. Will I see you tomorrow? I asked, immediately regretting how eager I sounded. I'll be here, Julian confirmed, though surrounded by people demanding my attention. Of course. He took a step closer, and my heartbeat accelerated. But perhaps we could continue our conversation. There is a reception after the first day. More intimate than tonight's event. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good. Another step closer. We were now standing less than an arm's length apart, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, smell the faint trace of whiskey on his breath from earlier. I should go, I said, but made no move to leave. Julian studied my face with an intensity that made me feel utterly exposed. You're worried about something. I'm not, I began, then stopped, unwilling to lie. This is all new to me. Your world, these people. Are you worried about what they think? He asked, his voice dropping lower. Or about what I think? I swallowed hard. Both, maybe. His expression softened. You don't have to explain a thing. I already know. My heart thundered in my chest as Julian reached for my hand, lifting it slowly to his lips. The brush of his mouth against my knuckles was so gentle I might have imagined it, but the fire it ignited inside me was undeniable. Suddenly, the light snapped off, plunging us into darkness, broken only by strips of moonlight. In that moment of shadow and silver light, everything hung in perfect suspension. His hand still holding mine, his face inches from my own, the world beyond this room temporarily ceasing to exist. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. For several heartbeats, we remained frozen in that moment, his fingers still wrapped around mine, the ghost of his lips lingering on my skin. In the darkness, I could only see fragments of Julian's face, illuminated by slices of moonlight filtering through the high windows. His eyes seemed to hold a question I wasn't ready to answer. Power outage? I whispered, my voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. Julian shook his head slightly, finally releasing my hand. Automatic timer. The exhibition hall lights shut down at midnight. Midnight. I hadn't realized how much time had passed, how long I'd spent in his orbit, spinning closer with each revolution. The thought should have alarmed me, but instead, I felt a strange calm, like the silence after an engine finally catches and settles into its rhythm. I began, stepping back. Stay! The word hung between us, charged and dangerous. Julian's silhouette shifted in the darkness. Just a moment longer. My pulse quickened. Why? Because when the lights come back on, we return to our separate worlds. His voice was low, almost confessional. And I'm not ready for that yet. Before I could respond, a beam of light swept across the floor, a security guard making rounds. Julian reacted instantly, grasping my elbow and guiding me behind a display platform that housed a vintage Maserati. We crouched together, his body shielding mine from view, close enough that I could feel the rise and fall of his chest against my shoulder. Mr. Blackwood has clearance for the entire building. A voice echoed from across the hall. If his car's still in the garage, he must be working late again. Lucky us, another midnight patrol, a second voice replied. The man's obsessed with these machines, probably sleeping in the garage with them. Footsteps retreated, followed by the click of a door. Julian remained perfectly still beside me, his breath warm against my neck. I became acutely aware of every point of contact between us. His hand still on my elbow, our shoulders pressed together, the accidental brush of his knee against mine. "They're gone," I said quietly, unable to bear the proximity any longer without acknowledging it. Julian didn't move. "Are you afraid of me, Liam?" The question caught me off guard. "No." "Then why are you trembling?" "I think you know why." The darkness made me brave, allowing me to voice what I couldn't in the light. He exhaled slowly. "Yes, I believe I do." The emergency lights flickered on then, bathing the room in a soft, amber glow that transformed the cars into copper sculptures. Julian stood, offering his hand to help me up. I took it, hyper-aware of how natural it felt to have his fingers intertwined with mine. "Tomorrow," he said, finally breaking the silence. "After the opening day reception. Meet me at the service elevator at 11. I'd like to show you something." "More cars?" I asked, attempting to lighten the charged atmosphere. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Something better." I barely slept that night, my mind replaying every look, every touch, every word exchanged between us. By morning, I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined the tension, the lingering glances, the way his lips had felt against my skin. In the harsh light of day, it seemed impossible that Julian Blackwood, whose net worth I'd looked up on my phone at 3 in the morning, would have any genuine interest in someone like me. The exhibition opened with the expected fanfare. Collectors and enthusiasts from around the world filled the halls, moving from one automotive masterpiece to another with reverent appreciation. I threw myself into my role, discussing restoration techniques with anyone who asked, demonstrating the correct way to preserve original dashboard components on a valuable Mercedes-Benz. Throughout the day, I caught glimpses of Julian across crowded spaces, shaking hands with dignitaries, speaking with reporters, pointing out details on various cars to groups of admirers. He moved through it all with practiced ease, the perfect host, yet somehow separate from it. Occasionally, our eyes would meet, and for a fleeting moment, the private connection we'd established would resurface before one of us looked away. By evening, my nerves were frayed. The reception was in full swing, champagne flowing as freely as the conversations about horsepower and provenance. I stood by a display of automotive artwork, nursing a single glass of wine, when Vanessa approached. "Quite a success, don't you think?" she said, surveying the room with satisfaction. "Mr. Blackwood seems pleased." I followed her gaze to where Julian stood surrounded by a group of investors, his expression politely engaged, but his posture suggesting he'd rather be elsewhere. "He's good at this," I observed. "He hates it," Vanessa replied with a knowing smile. "The socializing, the schmoozing, necessary evil in his world." She checked her watch. "Another hour, and he can escape." "Escape to where?" I asked, too quickly. She gave me a curious look. "His private quarters, I assume. He lives in the penthouse above the exhibition hall, complete with a helipad, though he rarely uses it except for emergencies." She leaned closer. "Between us, I think he'd rather spend the night in that underground garage with his cars than deal with these people." The information settled in my chest like a weight. Julian lived here, in this very building. The realization made our midnight rendezvous seem both more intimate and more dangerous. The hour crawled by with excruciating slowness. At precisely 10:55, I excused myself from a conversation about fuel injection systems and made my way to the service corridor. The exhibition was winding down, staff beginning the careful process of covering the vehicles for the night. The service elevator was tucked away in a back hallway, accessible only with a security keycard. I stood awkwardly beside it, checking my watch every 30 seconds, wondering if I'd misunderstood, if this was all an elaborate joke at my expense. At 11:05, I heard footsteps. Julian appeared at the end of the corridor, his tie loosened, jacket gone, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked tired, but somehow more himself than he had all day. "You came," he said simply. "You asked me to." He produced a keycard and summoned the elevator. When the doors opened, he gestured for me to enter first. The small space felt even more confined than it had the previous night, charged with a new awareness that made me stand with my back against the wall, as far from him as possible. Julian pressed the button marked P, then inserted his keycard into a special slot beneath the control panel. "Security override," he explained. Few people have access to this level. Your penthouse, I said. His eyebrow raised slightly. You've been asking about me. Vanessa mentioned it. Ah. A flicker of something, concern perhaps, crossed his face. Vanessa notices too much. The elevator ascended smoothly, the only sound the soft whir of cables. Julian watched me with that same intensity I'd felt the night before, as if trying to decipher something written in a language he almost understood. You're uncomfortable, he observed. I forced a laugh. I'm a mechanic from the South Side. Uncomfortable doesn't begin to cover it. Would you prefer to go back down? No. The answer came too quickly, too honestly. The elevator doors opened directly into a space that defied expectation. Instead of the sleek, sterile penthouse I'd imagined, we stepped into what appeared to be a library. Walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, leather armchairs positioned near windows that showcased the city panorama, a massive desk covered in papers and what looked like technical drawings. Not what you expected? Julian asked, watching my reaction. I thought it would be more ostentatious. He smiled. That's for public consumption. This is where I actually live. I moved deeper into the room, drawn to the bookshelves. Engineering texts, automotive histories, biographies of racing legends and coach builders, all well worn, many with notes in the margins. You've read all these? I asked, running my finger along the spine of a rare volume on Ferrari's early years. Most of them. Julian crossed to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of amber liquid. Whiskey? I shook my head. I should keep a clear head. Something like approval flashed in his eyes. Water then, or are you too nervous to even drink in my presence? The gentle teasing broke some of the tension. Water would be fine, thank you. He poured 2 glasses, whiskey for himself, water for me, and handed me mine with deliberate care, ensuring our fingers didn't touch. The considerate gesture, the awareness of boundaries, made something twist in my chest. Come, he said, nodding toward a set of double doors at the far end of the library. There's something I want to show you. The doors opened onto a rooftop space unlike any I'd ever seen. The helipad Vanessa had mentioned occupied one corner, but the rest had been transformed into a kind of suspended garden. Potted trees creating private alcoves, low lighting illuminating a path that wound between seating areas and what appeared to be a small dining space. In the center of it all stood a table for 2, set with silver and crystal, a single candle flickering in a hurricane lamp. I thought you might be hungry, Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. After working all day. The sight of the table, so obviously prepared with intention, so intimate, should have sent me running. Instead, I felt something inside me uncoil, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Starving, actually, I admitted. Relief softened his features. Good. Julian led me to the table, pulling out a chair with old-world courtesy. A covered dish waited at each place setting. No staff? I asked, looking around the empty rooftop. I gave them the night off. He took the seat across from me. Privacy seemed appropriate. There was that word again, privacy, with all its implications hanging in the air between us. Julian removed the cover from his plate, revealing a perfectly prepared steak with roasted vegetables. I hope you don't mind, he continued, gesturing for me to uncover my own plate. I took the liberty of ordering for us. The chef prepared everything before leaving. It looks amazing, I said honestly, surprised to find my appetite returning despite the nervous energy humming through my body. We ate in comfortable silence for several minutes, the city spread below us like a tapestry of light and shadow. From this height, the traffic moved in silent patterns, headlights tracing arterial routes through the urban landscape. May I ask you something? Julian finally said, setting down his knife and fork. I nodded, bracing myself. Why cars? The question was so unexpected, I almost laughed. That's what you want to know? For now. His eyes held mine. The rest will come in time. I considered the question, grateful for its simplicity. My father, I suppose. He restored Mustangs when I was growing up. Said they were honest machines. No pretense, no deception. What you see is what you get. Unlike people. Julian observed. Unlike people, I agreed. But it's more than that. A car, a good car, has personality, character flaws, quirks. You get to know them, understand their moods. When something's wrong, there's always a reason, a solution. If you know where to look, he added. Exactly. I smiled, warming to the subject. Everything makes sense inside an engine. Cause and effect, input and output, not like human emotions, Julian finished when I trailed off. I looked away, suddenly self-conscious. Your turn. Why cars? He leaned back in his chair, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Rebellion, initially. My father collected art. Expensive, untouchable. I wanted something I could touch, something with purpose beyond being admired from a distance. And now? Now. He paused, considering. Now I think I collect them because they remind me of a pure time. When engineering was art, when form and function were equally important. His expression turned wistful. There's an honesty to classic cars that modern life lacks. Everything now is about appearance, about perception. Says the man who owns a building with his name on it, I teased gently. Julian laughed, the sound surprisingly warm. Touché. Perhaps I'm as much of a hypocrite as anyone. He studied me across the table. But not with you. With you, I find I don't want to pretend. The confession hung between us, impossible to ignore or dismiss as mere politeness. I took a sip of water, buying time, my heart racing. Why me? I finally asked, the question that had been burning inside me since our first meeting. You could have anyone. That's precisely why. He set his glass down, leaning forward. Everyone wants something from Julian Blackwood. Access, money, status. You're the first person in years who looks at me and sees just me. I see the cars too, I admitted with a half smile. The cars are part of me. His eyes never left mine. You understand that in a way no one else has. The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. I wanted to believe him, wanted desperately to think that this connection wasn't imagined, that someone like him could see something worthwhile in someone like me. I should be intimidated by you, I said quietly. Are you? Less than I should be. I met his gaze directly, and that terrifies me more than anything. Julian stood abruptly, moving to the edge of the rooftop where a glass barrier was all that separated us from the 40-story drop. I followed, drawn to him like a satellite locked in orbit. All my life, he said as I joined him at the railing, I've collected things for others. Cars to impress business associates. Properties to demonstrate wealth. Connections to leverage for advantage. He turned to me, his profile sharp against the city lights. But you make me feel finally alive. The words stole my breath, not because of their beauty or the sentiment behind them, but because of the raw vulnerability in his voice. A crack in the perfect facade I'd glimpsed the night before, now widened into something that couldn't be repaired. Julian, I said softly, uncertain what should follow his name. You don't have to say anything. He reached out, his fingertips barely brushing my cheek, the contact so light it might have been imagined. I know this is complicated. Complicated, I echoed with a hollow laugh. That's one word for it. His hand fell away. Does it bother you, the difference in our circumstances? It should, I admitted. But what bothers me more is wondering if I'm skilled enough to be what you need. Julian's expression softened. What I need has nothing to do with skill or status or any of the metrics by which the world measures value. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight imperfection in his left iris that made it more blue than brown. What I need is someone who sees beyond the collection to the collector. Someone who understands that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones with visible scars. We stood there, suspended in the moment, neither advancing nor retreating. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of the potted jasmine that surrounded us. Below, the city continued its rhythmic pulse, unaware of the precipice on which we stood. May I show you something else? Julian finally asked, breaking the spell. I nodded, afraid to speak. He led me back through the library, past the elevator, down a corridor I hadn't noticed before. At the end was a simple door, no security pad, no electronic lock. Just an ordinary door that opened onto an extraordinary space. It was a workshop. Not the gleaming, pristine setup from the underground garage, but something more personal, more lived in. Tools hung on pegboards, their handles worn smooth from use. Parts and components occupied labeled bins. A vintage Lamborghini Miura sat in the center, its hood open, engine partially disassembled on a nearby workbench. My private project, Julian explained, moving into the space with the ease of long familiarity. No one else works on her, just me. I approached the Lamborghini with reverence, taking in the details that told the story of a vehicle loved not for its value but for its soul. She's beautiful. She was my first, Julian said, running his hand along the car's flank. Bought her when I was 24 with the first real money I ever made. She was in terrible shape. Previous owner nearly destroyed her with modifications. You're bringing her back to original specs? He nodded. It's taken years. I work on her when I need to remember who I am beneath everything else. He gestured toward a small refrigerator in the corner. Beer? This seems like a beer conversation rather than whiskey. I smiled. Beer would be perfect. Julian retrieved 2 bottles, opened them against the edge of the workbench with practiced ease, and handed one to me. The casual gesture, so at odds with the formal dinner we'd just shared, made something warm unfurl in my chest. To works in progress, he said, raising his bottle. Works in progress, I echoed, our bottles clinking softly in the quiet room. We settled into a rhythm then, moving around the car, discussing the restoration challenges, the decisions he'd made, the compromises between authenticity and function. I found myself slipping into the familiar language of engines and transmissions, forgetting momentarily who he was, who I was supposed to be. You're making a face, Julian observed as I examined the carburetor setup. Just wondering why you chose this configuration over the factory original. Better performance, he replied with a shrug. Some purism must be sacrificed at the altar of driving enjoyment. Heresy, I teased, but I was smiling. I contain multitudes, he returned easily, leaning against the workbench, watching me with unguarded appreciation. The hours slipped by, marked only by empty beer bottles and increasingly technical conversations. Julian listened when I suggested alternative approaches to certain problems, asking questions that revealed both his expertise and his willingness to consider new perspectives. You know, he said sometime after 2 a.m., most people see the finished product, the gleaming paint, the perfect chrome. Nobody sees this part, the grease, the frustration, the moments when nothing works despite your best efforts. This is the real restoration, I agreed, wiping my hands on a shop rag after examining the distributor. The part that matters. The part that matters, Julian repeated softly. He was standing close, closer than necessary in the spacious workshop. The Lamborghini's taillights caught the edge of his profile, casting him in a red glow that emphasized the angles of his face, the intensity of his gaze as it settled on mine. Liam, he said, my name a question in his mouth. I knew what he was asking. Permission, confirmation, appellation perhaps. The moment stretched between us, fragile as spun glass, heavy with possibility. Yes, I whispered, the word barely audible over the hammering of my heart. Julian moved then, closing the distance between us with deliberate slowness, giving me every opportunity to step away, to change my mind. His hand came up to cradle my jaw, thumb brushing along my cheekbone with a gentleness that made my breath catch. When his lips finally met mine, the contact was tentative, questioning. A heartbeat passed, and then another, before I responded, leaning into him, my hands finding purchase on his shoulders. The kiss deepened, transformed from hesitant exploration to something more urgent, more desperate. Julian backed me against the workbench, his body pressed against mine, solid and warm and real. My fingers tangled in his hair, disrupting its perfect arrangement, drawing a soft sound from him that vibrated against my lips. We broke apart, breathless, foreheads touching, neither willing to move further away. Julian's eyes searched mine, looking for regret or uncertainty. "All right," he murmured. I nodded, unable to form words around the emotion swelling in my throat. His thumb traced the outline of my lower lip, his expression a mixture of wonder and trepidation. "I've wanted to do that since I saw you looking at that Alfa Romeo like it was the most precious thing you'd ever seen." "It wasn't the car I was looking at," I admitted, the confession easier now with the taste of him still on my lips. Julian smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face, erasing years and defenses. He leaned in again, the second kiss deeper than the first, his hand sliding beneath my jacket, warm against my sides, even through the fabric of my shirt. Time seemed to suspend, the world narrowing to the points of contact between us. His mouth on mine, his hands mapping the contours of my body, my fingers gripping his shoulders as if afraid he might disappear if I loosened my hold. A distant chime broke the spell, an elevator arriving somewhere in the penthouse. Julian tensed, pulling back slightly. "Security patrol," he explained, his voice rough. "They check the penthouse level every few hours." Reality crashed back with jarring force. We were in Julian Blackwood's private workshop, in his penthouse, in his building. If anyone found us like this... "If anyone finds out," I said, voicing the thought aloud. "My reputation, my career, it could all unravel." Julian stepped back, giving me space, his expression sobering. "Your career? The automotive world is small," I explained. "Conservative, old-fashioned. If people thought I was..." I trailed off, unable to finish. "If they thought you were sleeping with a client to advance your career?" Julian finished for me, his tone carefully neutral. I winced at the bluntness. "Something like that." "And what about me?" he asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. "What would they think about Julian Blackwood?" "That's different. You're powerful enough to be eccentric, rich enough to be forgiven?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Or just old enough that they'd call it a midlife crisis?" The sudden tension between us was palpable, the easy connection of moments before fracturing along fault lines we'd both been trying to ignore. "I didn't mean..." I began, but Julian was already moving toward the door. "We should go," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Before security reaches this level." I followed him out of the workshop, through the library, to the elevator. The ride down was silent, heavy with unspoken words and the lingering sensation of his lips against mine. When the doors opened on the main floor, Julian finally spoke. "I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. It won't happen again." The formal tone, the return of his public persona, felt like a physical blow. "Julian, good night, Mr. Hayes," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I'll see you tomorrow at the exhibition." The doors closed between us before I could respond, leaving me alone in the empty exhibition hall, the taste of him still on my lips, the ghost of his touch still warm on my skin. The second day of the exhibition passed in a blur of technical discussions and polite conversations. Julian was nowhere to be seen until late afternoon, when he appeared for a scheduled presentation on the evolution of Italian design. He was impeccably dressed, perfectly composed, and completely unreachable, his eyes sliding past me whenever I came into view, his attention focused on potential buyers and industry insiders. By evening, I was exhausted from the effort of pretending nothing had happened, from the constant tension of wondering if he would acknowledge me, speak to me, look at me with any of the warmth I'd glimpsed the night before. As the exhibition hall began to empty, I retreated to a quiet corner where a rare Austin Healey was displayed, seeking a moment of solace among the machines that had always made sense to me. I ran my hand along the car's fender, feeling the perfect curve of metal beneath my palm. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" I turned to find Vanessa beside me, her tablet tucked under her arm, her expression sympathetic. "One of my favorites," I agreed, forcing a smile. "You seem tired," she observed. "Everything all right?" "Just a long day," I deflected. She nodded, unconvinced. "Julian's been running us all ragged, more demanding than usual today." The casual use of his first name caught my attention. "You've worked with him for a long time?" 5 years, she confirmed. long enough to know when something's bothering him. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. He was on the roof half the night. Security mentioned it this morning, said he was up there until dawn, just standing at the edge, looking out at the city. My heart contracted painfully. The image of Julian alone on that rooftop, sleepless and troubled after I'd left, made me want to find him immediately, to explain, to apologize. Probably just exhibition stress, I said instead. Vanessa studied me for a moment longer, her expression knowing. Probably. She checked her watch. There's a private event in his rooftop garden tonight, VIPs only. You should come. The collection specialists are all invited. I'm not sure. 8 o'clock, she interrupted, already walking away. Don't be late. I watched her disappear into the crowd, uncertainty churning in my stomach. The invitation felt like a lifeline, a chance to speak with Julian again, to clear the air between us. It also felt like a test, one I wasn't sure I was brave enough to pass. At precisely 8 o'clock, I found myself in the express elevator, surrounded by wealthy collectors and industry executives, all heading to Julian's private rooftop. I'd changed into my only good suit, the same one I'd worn on the first day, feeling hopelessly underdressed compared to the bespoke tailoring and designer labels surrounding me. The rooftop had been transformed from the intimate space of the previous night into a glittering reception venue. Staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet played subtly in one corner. Lighting had been strategically placed to showcase both the garden and the city panorama beyond. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and positioned myself at the periphery of the gathering, watching Julian move through the crowd with practiced grace. He was the perfect host, attentive, charming, focused entirely on his guests. If he noticed my presence, he gave no indication. An hour passed, then another. I was on the verge of leaving when Vanessa appeared at my side again. He asked about you, she said without preamble. My heart stuttered. What? Julian asked if you had accepted the invitation. She gave me a pointed look. He's been watching you all night, you know, when he thinks no one's looking. Before I could respond, she was gone again, weaving through the crowd with purposeful strides. I stood frozen, my champagne forgotten in my hand, scanning the rooftop for Julian. I found him standing alone by the glass barrier, momentarily separated from his guests, looking out at the city below. Without allowing myself time to reconsider, I crossed the rooftop toward him. He sensed my approach before I reached him, his shoulders tensing slightly, though he didn't turn around. Mr. Hayes, he said quietly as I came to stand beside him. Enjoying the party? Not particularly, I admitted. You. A fleeting smile touched his lips, about as much as a root canal. We stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the city rather than at each other. About last night, I began. Please, he interrupted. There's no need to explain. I overstepped and I apologize. That's not what I was going to say. Julian finally turned to face me, his expression carefully guarded. No. I took a deep breath. I was going to say I've been thinking about it all day. About you, about us. The last word felt presumptuous on my tongue, but I continued. I was scared. Not of you or what happened between us, but of what it might mean. Something softened in his eyes. And what does it mean, Liam? I don't know, I answered honestly. I just know that when I'm with you, I feel seen, in a way I never have before. Julian glanced over my shoulder at the crowd of guests, his public persona momentarily dropping to reveal the man I'd glimpsed in his workshop. He's a titan in this world of metal and money, he said softly, echoing my thoughts with uncanny precision. But with you, he just wants to be seen. The vulnerability in his admission made my chest ache. I wanted to reach for him, to bridge the careful distance he'd placed between us, but we were surrounded by exactly the kind of people we both feared would judge us. Can we talk? I asked. Somewhere private? Julian hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Meet me by the helipad in 20 minutes. I need to make an appearance with the Japanese delegation first. I retreated to the far side of the rooftop, making a show of examining the architecture, the plantings, anything to occupy myself for the interminable 20 minutes. When the time finally came, I slipped away from the main gathering, following a pathway that led to the helipad I'd noticed the night before. Julian was already waiting, his silhouette outlined against the city lights. He'd removed his jacket and tie, the top buttons of his shirt undone, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd run his hand through it repeatedly. "You came," he said as I approached, an echo of our exchange from the previous night. "You asked me to," he smiled faintly at the repetition. "So I did." We stood facing each other, the wind tugging at our clothes, the sounds of the party a distant murmur behind us. Julian was the first to break the silence. "I spent all of last night and today convincing myself that what happened was a mistake," he said, his voice low. "That I'd imagined the connection between us, or manufactured it out of loneliness or midlife crisis, or whatever convenient explanation would allow me to look you in the eye today without feeling this." He gestured vaguely between us. "This pull. Did it work?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Not even for a moment." Julian stepped closer, close enough that I could see the city lights reflected in his eyes. "I've spent my entire adult life constructing a persona, building walls, creating distance. One night with you, and those walls might as well be made of paper." I swallowed hard. "I'm just a mechanic, Julian. I fix broken things for a living. I don't belong in your world." "And yet here you are," he countered softly. "In my world, on my rooftop, looking at me like I'm something more than the sum of my possessions." "You are more," I insisted. "So much more." He reached out then, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw with exquisite gentleness. "I've spent 40 years amassing a collection meant to impress the world. Cars, properties, art, influence. None of it means anything compared to how I feel when you look at me like that." The confession, so raw and unguarded, made me brave. I leaned into his touch, turning my face to press a kiss against his palm. "Then, stop trying to impress the world." Julian's breath caught. "What if the world notices? Do you care?" "I used to," he admitted. "Now I'm not so sure." We stood at the edge of the rooftop, city lights spread below like constellations, the wind tugging at his shirt, at my jacket, at the careful boundaries we'd constructed between us. Julian's hand moved from my jaw to the back of my neck, his touch warm against my skin. "I'd give up everything," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "My cars, my gallery, my public life. But only if you asked me to." The words hung between us, impossible and sincere, a declaration and a question wrapped together. In his eyes, I saw a vulnerability that mirrored my own, the fear of rejection, of misplaced trust, of opening oneself only to be wounded. "I would never ask that of you," I said softly, "because then you wouldn't be the man I trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Julian's expression softened into something like wonder. "The man you what, Liam?" Instead of answering, I closed the distance between us, my lips finding his in the darkness, my hands gripping the front of his shirt as if afraid the wind might tear him away. He responded immediately, his arms encircling me, holding me against him with a desperation that matched my own. The kiss was different from those we'd shared the night before, less hesitant, more certain. A declaration rather than a question. When we finally broke apart, Julian rested his forehead against mine, his breathing uneven. "We should go back," he said, though he made no move to release me. "People will notice we're both missing." "Let them notice," I replied, surprising myself with the boldness. Julian smiled, pressing another brief kiss to my lips. "Brave words. Are you ready for what they might mean?" The question sobered me. Was I ready? Ready to be seen as Julian Blackwood's lover, to have my professional accomplishments questioned, to navigate a world I barely understood with him by my side? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I think I want to find out." His eyes searched mine, looking for doubt, for hesitation. "We could keep it private for now, until you're sure." The offer was tempting, a chance to explore this connection without the scrutiny, the whispers, the potential damage to my career. It would be the sensible choice, the safe choice. But standing there with the city spread beneath us like a carpet of stars, Julian's hands warm against my back, I found myself craving something beyond sensible and safe. "And if I'm never sure?" I asked quietly. "If there's always a reason to wait, to hide?" A shadow crossed his face. "Then we'd be living half a life, always looking over our shoulders, always careful about who might be watching." His grip on me tightened slightly. "I've lived that way for too long already, Liam. In different ways, perhaps, but the same fear, the same emptiness." The revelation stunned me, that this man who seemed to have everything could feel the same hollow ache I had carried for years. That behind the wealth and status and perfect public persona was someone as hungry for genuine connection as I was. "Then we don't hide," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke the words. "Not forever, at least. We're careful, but not ashamed." Relief softened Julian's features, transformed them. He looked younger suddenly, unburdened, the carefully maintained mask slipping to reveal the man beneath. "Come with me," he said, taking my hand. "There's something I want to show you." He led me away from the helipad, along a path I hadn't noticed before, to a secluded corner of the rooftop garden, hidden from the main reception area by a strategically placed grouping of potted trees. A small stone bench sat nestled among night-blooming jasmine, the fragrance heavy in the air. "My private sanctuary," Julian explained, gesturing for me to sit. "When the parties and the people become too much, I escape here. No one knows about it except the landscaper, and he's been with me for 20 years. I sat beside him on the bench, our shoulders touching, his thigh warm against mine. The murmur of the party seemed miles away, rather than just beyond the screen of foliage. "It's beautiful," I said, taking in the careful arrangement of plants, the subtle lighting that cast dappled shadows across the stone pavers. "It's real," he replied. "Everything else up here is for show, designed to impress. This space is just for me. And now, for you." The simple inclusion, the sharing of something private, something personal, felt more intimate than our kisses, more significant than any grand declaration. "Julian," I began, turning to face him on the bench, "I need you to understand something. I'm not good at this, at relationships, at opening up. Cars I understand. People." I shook my head. "People are complicated." "Is that what this is?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "A relationship?" I hesitated, uncertain of the correct terminology for whatever was developing between us. "I don't know what to call it. I just know I haven't felt this way before, this pull toward someone, this sense of recognition." Julian's hand found mine in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with my own. "We don't need to name it yet. We can just—" He paused, searching for the right words. "We can just be, for a while. See where it leads." The simplicity of the suggestion eased something tight in my chest. Just be. No expectations, no definitions, no pressure to conform to roles I didn't understand. "I'd like that," I said softly. We sat in comfortable silence, hand in hand, the night wrapping around us like a protective cloak. The distance between Julian Blackwood, titan of industry and renowned collector, and Liam Hayes, working-class mechanic, seemed to evaporate in that moment, leaving just two people, connected by something neither could fully articulate. After what might have been minutes or hours, Julian spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Tomorrow is the final day of the exhibition," he said. "After that, you return to your garage, and I to my endless meetings and obligations." The reminder of our separate realities sent a pang through me. "And then?" He turned to me, his expression serious. "And then we decide if this," he squeezed my hand, "is something we want to pursue, despite the complications, despite the differences in our worlds." "And if it is?" I asked, holding my breath. A smile touched his lips, warm and genuine. "Then we find a way to bridge those worlds. Together." The promise in that single word, together, made my heart stutter. I leaned forward, drawn to him like gravity, my free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "I'd like that," I whispered again, just before my lips met his. This kiss was different from the others, slower, deeper, laden with promise rather than desperation. Julian's hand slid into my hair, cradling the back of my head as though I were something precious, something valued beyond measure. When we broke apart, his eyes remained closed for a moment, as if memorizing the sensation. When they opened, I saw a clarity in them I hadn't noticed before. A decision made. A path chosen. "We should go back," he said reluctantly, "separately. You first, then I'll follow in a few minutes." I nodded, understanding the necessity of discretion, at least for now. As I stood to leave, Julian caught my hand once more. "Liam," he said, my name like a prayer on his lips. "Whatever happens tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that, know that this was real, is real." "I know," I assured him, bending to press one last kiss to his forehead. "I'll see you tomorrow." I made my way back to the main reception area, straightening my jacket, trying to assume an expression that wouldn't betray the tumult of emotions coursing through me. The party was beginning to thin out, guests departing in small groups, staff discreetly clearing glasses and plates. Vanessa caught my eye from across the rooftop, a knowing smile playing at her lips. I nodded once in her direction, neither confirming nor denying whatever she suspected. She raised her glass in a silent toast before turning away. As I rode the elevator down to the main floor, I felt as though I'd stepped off the edge of a cliff, the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of falling with no certainty of where I might land. Julian Blackwood had offered me a glimpse of a world I'd never imagined entering, a connection I'd never dared hope for, and despite every rational voice screaming caution, I wanted more. More of his smile in the darkness, more of his hands on my skin, more of the way he looked at me as if I were the rarest, most valuable piece in his collection. Tomorrow would bring complications, questions, the harsh reality of our different worlds colliding. But tonight, as I walked through the silent exhibition hall, past rows of priceless automobiles gleaming in the low light, I allowed myself to believe in possibility. To believe that sometimes, against all odds, the most unlikely connections might be the ones that endure, like a perfect restoration, bringing something beautiful back to life one careful touch at a time. Standing at the edge of the rooftop, city lights spread below like constellations, Julian had offered me everything. Not his wealth or his status or his collection, but himself. Vulnerable and real and afraid, just as I was. "I'd give up everything," he'd said. "My cars, my gallery, my public life. But only if you asked me to." I wouldn't ask, but the fact that he'd offered, that was enough. More than enough to make me brave enough to take the first step into whatever awaited us beyond tomorrow. As I pushed through the exhibition center's door into the cool night air, I glanced back at the penthouse level, its lights glowing softly against the dark scheme. Somewhere up there, Julian was returning to his guests, playing the role expected of him, perhaps already counting the minutes until we could be alone again. I smiled to myself, a quiet, private thing, and turned toward home, carrying with me the taste of his lips, the warmth of his hands, and the promise of something neither of us could yet name, but both of us wanted desperately to explore. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, for the first time in years, I felt perfectly, completely alive.